Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do, about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,121st day of voluntary exile in protest from the USA. You can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all crammed together as one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, you'll also be able to call in via toll-free phone from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype from around the world and join the conversation. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the big clock on the truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/TaxMageddon countdown page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire in 153 days, 13 hours, 52 minutes, and 16 seconds. Well, I don't like to do a show that is almost completely focused on one subject, but I have to. Something is definitely rotten in Colorado, where everybody's been talking about the shooting. It was just on the news that you just heard, but there's a lot more to the story that's coming out from various sources that, when you put it all together, paints a very curious picture. Now, as you know, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I consider conspiracy theories a form of mental masturbation, and I think that they are utterly unproductive. They waste time when you can be looking at facts and dealing with issues in front of you. You worry about proving conspiracy theories that can't be proved. But let me start again with just a little background. James Holmes, the Aurora, Colorado shooter who reportedly opened fire at a Batman movie premiere, and you know, it's funny, we have to say reportedly, even though he was caught doing it, and you know, there's no question of it, we still have to say reportedly, was a medical student at the University of Colorado pursuing a PhD in neuroscience, at least according to ABC News. And we know the mainstream news is always accurate. As part of the attack, Holmes painted his hair red and referred to himself as the Joker, one of Batman's arch enemies. According to news reports, this sudden violent rampage was completely out of character for James Holmes, who was described as shy. But frankly, that by itself is not unusual for demented maniac mass murderers. It seems to me that an awful lot of them are described by people who knew them as shy. But nevertheless, we go on. The Gray Lady, the New York Times, reported that according to a pre-med student at the University of Colorado in Boulder, who worked with Holmes for 3 months last summer as a research assistant, Holmes spent much of his time immersed in the computer, often participating in role-playing online games. Even more weirdly, Occupy Wall Street's main website, OccupyWallStreet.org, has identified Holmes as an Occupy Black Bloc member, which has been independently confirmed. Now, a gun-toting right-wing maniac who's part of Occupy, that strikes me as weird. There are already reports that Holmes was involved in mind-altering neuroscience research on a $26,000 government grant and may have ended up becoming involved at a depth he never anticipated. His actions seem to many to indicate a strange detachment from reality, indicating he was not in his right mind. Of course, who dresses up like the Joker, goes into a movie theater and shoots a bunch of people, would be considered in his right mind? I'd like to know about that. But that can normally only be accomplished through drugs, hypnosis, or trauma, or a combination of them. In other words, brainwashing. His behavior doesn't make sense. His behavior already reveals stark inconsistencies that question the mainstream explanation of events. For example, He started by opening fire on innocent people, but then calmly surrendered to police without resistance. That just doesn't sync with the idea of killing everyone. Then Holmes admitted to police that his apartment was booby-trapped with explosives. Again, it doesn't make sense for a murdering mass maniac. When police searched his apartment, they discovered it was booby-trapped indeed and evacuated surrounding buildings. Bomb technicians had to determine how to disarm flammable and explosive materials in the third-floor apartment, which were so complex it required a great deal of time to defuse. None of this makes any sense to me. If you're a killer bent on causing mayhem, why tell the police about your surprise bomb waiting for them back at your apartment? More interestingly, Holmes clearly was armed with military-grade weaponry, including a rifle, 2 handguns, a knife, a bulletproof vest, leg, groin, and throat protectors, a ballistic helmet, a gas device, a gas mask, and military SWAT clothing. Apparently, this Holmes was equipped with military-grade weaponry by someone with connections to military equipment, QED. This simply isn't a lone gunman. This is somebody who was selected for a mission, given equipment to carry it out, and then somehow brainwashed into getting it done. This was not a crime of passion. It was carefully planned, heavily funded, and a technically advanced attack. We'll talk about who might be behind this attack when we come back after our commercial break. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Stay tuned. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, continuing to talk about the Colorado massacre and who might be behind all this. Well, of course, the first thought some people might make is Al-Qaeda, but if we're Al-Qaeda, I think the guy certainly wouldn't have told the police about the booby traps. Some right-wing militia nut, I don't think so, because he belonged to Occupy, and again, he wouldn't have told the police about the booby traps. Some journals are already suggesting the FBI or another agency of the United States government is behind it, based on the long and well-documented history of setting up and staging similar attacks, then stopping them right before they happen. Remember that the FBI had admitted to setting up terror plots, providing the weapons and gear, staging the location of the bombings, and even driving the vehicles to pull it off. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's been admitted by the FBI right out in the open. Even the New York Times, the bastion of government establishment, openly reports this. The United States has allegedly been narrowly saved from lethal terrorist plots in recent years. A would-be suicide bomber was intercepted on his way to the Capitol. A scheme to bomb synagogues and shoot Stinger missiles at military aircraft was developed by men in Newburgh, New York, was thwarted. An idea to fly explosive-packed model airplanes into the Pentagon and the Capitol was hatched in Massachusetts, but put back in its egg by the United States government. But all of these dramas were orchestrated by the FBI, whose undercover agents and informers posed as terrorists offering a dummy missile, fake C4 explosives, a disarmed suicide vest, and basic equipment training. The FBI provided a van loaded with 6 55-gallon drums of, quote, inert material, unquote, harmless blasting caps, a detonator cord, and a gallon of diesel fuel to make the van smell flammable. An undercover FBI agent even did the driving, and the plot still thickens. On top of all this, Holmes apparently has no background. He's not on anybody's radar screen. Nowhere. Nothing, said a peace officer in a New York Times article. This guy is somewhat of an enigma. Nobody knows anything about him. James Holmes' only known contact with law enforcement is a traffic summons, the authorities said. He earned a bachelor's degree with honors in neuroscience in 2010 from the University of California, Riverside, was a graduate student in neurosciences at the University of Colorado at Denver's Anschutz Medical Campus. He was currently collecting unemployment, but there's also reports that he had a $26,000 federal government research grant. Question: How does a medical student on a federal grant or unemployment, whichever it was, afford $20,000 in weapons, explosives, and ancillary gear? Question. Where does an unemployed, introverted medical student get the training to deploy sophisticated booby traps, tactical armor, weapons systems, and more? I don't think it was part of his PhD curriculum. All this leads to an obvious third-party influence over all of this. Someone else taught this guy these skills and funded the acquisition of the equipment. Western journalism and other publications posit that this was staged just in time for a vote on the UN Small Arms Treaty. Increasingly, this shooting is looking like a deliberate plot staged by the government itself, much like Operation Fast and Furious, which pulled off by the ATF, helped smuggle guns into Mexico for the purpose of causing gun violence in the U.S., then blaming it on the Second Amendment. Of course, that blew up in their face and some officers got killed. All of this looks like James Holmes completed a mission and then calmly ended that mission by surrendering to the police and admitting everything. This is smacks of the Manchurian Candidate to me. The mission, as we are now learning, was to cause as much terror and mayhem as possible, then to have that multiplied by the mainstream national media at exactly the right time, leading up to the UN vote scheduled for last week on a global small arms treaty that could have resulted in gun confiscation across America. But as I reported, the vote on that treaty has been delayed. Unfortunately, this has all the signs of Fast and Furious Episode 2. I wouldn't be surprised to discover someone in Washington was behind it all. After all, there's no quicker way to disarm a nation and take total control over the population than to stage violence, blame it on firearms, then call for leaders to do something. Such calls inevitably end up resulting in gun confiscation, and it's never too long after that before government tyranny really ramps up into a total police state. You know, America is becoming more and more of a police state every day. More and more, there are more and more limits, there's more and more spying. Government is acting more like stormtroopers all the time. The FBI is like the SS or the KGB. The local police act like the Sturmabteilung, the Hitler's stormtroopers. It really is becoming intolerable. And this just jumps up at a convenient time. I think Benjamin Disraeli was the one who said that he didn't believe that anything happened by coincidence. And certainly, of course, they've been ready to jump on it and take advantage of it. Our friend Chuck Schumer, senator from New York, using the pretext provided by the Aurora shooting, was loath to miss a chance to use the coffins of the victims as a soapbox for yet another mind-numbing leftist pronouncement on the dangers of law-abiding citizens owning firearms. I still remind you that if one or two law-abiding citizens had been carrying weapons in that theater, this atrocity would not have happened, regardless of who was behind it, because somebody would have capped that SOB and saved probably at least 10 lives, and most of the 58 people who were wounded would not have been. Because you don't walk in and start shooting at people when people can shoot back. You know, it's my experience in life that the best way to stop a bully is to give them a bloody nose. The best way to have security is to have an armed citizenry. But Chuck Schumer doesn't believe in that. And he's joined by Frank Lautenberg, Dianne Feinstein, Kirsten Gillibrand, among the other usual suspects. And they are backed by the Brady campaign, of which Ronald Reagan would be so ashamed. You know, it's based on Jim Brady, who, when the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan, and I was on my way to the hotel where Reagan was shot when it happened, it was based on the campaign from Jim Brady, who was unfortunately shot by Reagan's would-be assassin and permanently injured with brain problems. And they've used that, they've milked that, and their fellow traveler fringe anti-Bill of Rights groups in this one more attempt to find an excuse to take guns away from people and criminalize guns. Now, following the Senate approval of amendments for the incredibly invasive Cybersecurity Act of 2012, which is simply CISPA, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act under a new name, which now I just call it CISPA 2, Schumer and his friends pulled a parliamentary fast one. They tacked an amendment onto the bill, which might as well be known as the Aurora Amendment. Rather than try to take on the Second Amendment head-to-head, Schumer and his accomplices cloaked their insidious program to ban everything more powerful than a .22 caliber target pistol inside CISPA 2. According to The Hill, the amendment would, quote, make it illegal to transfer or possess large-capacity feeding devices such as gun magazines, belts, feed stripes, and drums of more than 10 rounds of ammunition, with the exception of .22 caliber rimfire ammunition. Now, it's interesting that they picked .22 caliber rimfire ammunition. Anyone who's ever done any gun reloading, as I have, will know that you cannot reload rimfire cartridges. You can only reload centerfire cartridges. If you've ever looked at a bullet on the back, there's a center part, and that's where the hammer strikes, and that's what sets off the bullet. But on rimfire, .22 caliber, it doesn't work that way, and those cartridges are the only ones that can't be reloaded. Other cartridges can be used dozens, if not hundreds of times by being cleaned and reloaded. So it's very smart. They want to take away all the weapons that you could use to protect yourself from a government coup against your rights, to protect yourself from the government infringement of the Second Amendment, to protect your rights as American citizens, and let you only have things that really will not allow you to fight back. Now, once again, America is becoming a police state. 1984 is here for real. Now, when we come back, we'll be talking about Michigan State nullifying NDAA, or at least trying to. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'll be back in 6 minutes after the news and a commercial. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. You can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is operational, you will also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada via phone or Skype from around the world and join the conversation or start a fight with me if you'd like. You know, I couldn't help but listen to the news report on James Holmes. And one thing struck me as just a little odd, just a little out of place. Just one more thing I have to go back to. He was only charged with one count of explosives, possessing explosive devices. And yet, according to the police report, the apartment was intricately rigged with all kinds of devices. Every one of those devices would have been a count. So that's one more little element that just struck me that does not fit into the picture that we're being presented. Anyway, moving on, Michigan State NDAA nullification bills are moving forward. Citizens of Michigan continue to press for passage of a state law that would nullify the execution of the National Defense Authorization Act, you know, the act that takes away all of our rights and gives them to the guy living in the expensive public housing at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They want that act nullified within the boundaries of their state. One such effort was begun by Michigan State Representative Tom McMillan on June 14 when he introduced his bill to prevent the arrest and indefinite detention of citizens of his state under the authority of relevant provisions of the NDAA. According to the text of the legislation, it says, "No agency of this state, no political subdivision of this state, no employee of an agency of this state or of a political subdivision of this state acting in his or her official capacity, and no member of the Michigan National Guard on official state duty shall aid an agency of the armed forces of the United States in any investigation, prosecution, or detention of any person pursuant to 50 U.S.C. 1541 as provided by the Federal National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012. In contrast to growing efforts to nullify the NDAA, recent congressional actions regarding it are cause for real big concern. Next year's NDAA is already working its way through the committee to be bigger and better from their perspective, and bigger and a hell of a lot worse from ours. By a vote of 56-5, the House Armed Services Committee in May passed a slate of changes to the NDAA for fiscal year 13. Committee Chairman Buck McKeon, a Republican of California, released a statement announcing the goals of the bill's latest version. Quote, "I'm proud of the bipartisan way the committee has worked together to build this bill. It rebuilds a force strained by 10 years of war while restoring both fiscal and strategic sanity to the defense budget. It keeps faith with our troops and their families while keeping America ready to face the threats of the future." Really? I don't think so, because it doesn't do anything to take away the biggest threat of the future, which is the power of the President of the United States under this act to have American citizens arrested by the military without writ of habeas corpus, without court appearance, without due process, without right to counsel, and even be killed at the President's whim. So I don't think it does what he says it does. It's trying to distract Americans from what's going on at home by these phony wars in which the United States has no business being involved in Iraq and Afghanistan. We should be out of there, and we should be out of there now. Afghanistan has never been successfully conquered by an outside power, not even the British under the Raj in India when they were the greatest empire in the world, not the Russian Empire. Nobody. America can't do it either. And our nation building in Iraq has been a complete failure because Iraq isn't a nation. It's a made-up country composed of three groups that hate each other. The Kurds that sort of like us, the Sunnis and Shiites which hate each other. And both of them hate us. So what are we doing there? We're trying to create a free democratic nation in a country that does not believe in freedom because its culture does not believe in freedom. Anyway, going on with this story. Representative McKeon declares that every American must have his day in court. He further reaffirms, quote, "the fundamental right to habeas corpus of any person detained in the United States pursuant to the 2001 authorization for the use of military force." Section 1033 of the markup version passed by the committee is offered as the codification of that protection. But here's the text of that updated provision as it stands at this point in the legislative process. This section would state that nothing in the authorization for use of military force or the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012 shall be construed to deny the availability of the writ of habeas corpus in a court ordained or established by or under Article 3 of the Constitution, or for any person who is detained in the United States pursuant to the authorization for use of military force. This sounds great until you read it very closely. The new bill does nothing to prevent the indefinite detention of Americans under the 2013 NDAA. Furthermore, it only reiterates that habeas corpus is a right in the courts established under Article 3 of the Constitution, upon which everyone agrees. The concerns of millions of Americans from every band in the political spectrum is that Americans detained as belligerents under the terms of the NDAA will not be tried in Article 3 courts, but will be subject to military tribunals, such as the one currently considering the case of the so-called Gitmo 5. Gitmo, of course, referring to Guantanamo Bay. There's nothing in the 2013 NDAA that passed out of the House Armed Services Committee last week that will guarantee Americans will be tried in a constitutional court and not a military commission. Such underhanded dealing should not go unnoticed, especially when it's performed by the Republican Party, which controls the House of Representatives. Everybody's saying, gee, you've got to vote for Mitt Romney and the Republicans because they're going to save us, and yet they are participating in keeping this horrendous bill in place. And never forget, it was George W. Bush, that SOB, who got the Patriot Act passed, and a weak, cowardly Congress that didn't take the time to read it, that gave us the mess in which we find ourselves now, with an ever-growing monster government that's very quickly turning into a terminator of our rights. So nothing is better at all with this 2013 Act. Don't let them lie to you. When we come back, I'm going to change the subject completely and talk about HSBC laundering money. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Stay tuned. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Well, HSBC, the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, the world's offshore bank, puts aside $2 billion to cover possible money laundering fines. Gee, what a surprise. You know, it's my experience that in my trust companies that we get more, any clients that we have problems with where there's concerns about source of funds seems to come out of HSBC Hong Kong. Isn't that amazing? After a record-breaking fine for money laundering in Mexico and similar treatment in the U.S., HSBC is starting to slowly catch on to the idea that it's a bad thing to launder criminal funds. I'm not surprised because, you know, Chinese culture, red Chinese culture especially, you know, you have a criminal country run by criminals, so why would they not want criminal funds? It would seem that it would be naturally attracted to them. Before the fines, pre-tax profit for the first 6 months of 2012 was $12.7 billion, up 11% on the $11.5 billion the bank made a year ago. The profits were boosted by $4.3 billion of asset sales in the United States. That's because the Chinese are getting out of the U.S. But now the bank is setting aside $1.3 billion to cover UK mis-selling compensation and $700 million for any U.S. fines following money laundering accusations. The $1.3 billion covers a little more than $1 billion for the mis-selling of payment protection insurance and $240 million to cover the sale of specialist interest rate protection products to businesses. The $700 million set aside for money laundering follows a U.S. Senate report published earlier this month, which found that lax controls at Europe's biggest bank had left it vulnerable to being used to launder dirty money from around the world. Now, I've had personal experience dealing with their compliance department in Panama, and they are among the stupidest people with whom I have ever had the misfortune of having any interface in the world, and I've met with a hell of a lot of stupid people. Remember, I worked in Washington for 8.5 years, so that's just about the bottom of the barrel right there. HSBC is big, and it's bad, and it's good that it's getting fined, but you know, these fines are so small compared to its total vast value that it is just almost doesn't matter. I mean, you know, the board of directors, I'm sure, when they set aside this money, went, it's a cost of doing business. We've made so much more than these fines will cost us that it's worth doing. Citibank, a year ago, was fined $75 million for defrauding its own customers, but it made many times that. This happens all the time. The banks get fined. If you or I were to do the same thing, if we were to launder money, we would go to jail. And I remember I was a target once. One day, many years ago, in 1996, 97, a guy walked into my office in St. Petersburg, Florida, with a briefcase full of money, $600,000. And he said, I want you to launder this for me. And I said, that's not the kind of business I do. And he kept on persisting. I said, look, I don't do that. Why don't you, maybe at best I can give you a phone number in Antigua where they might do that, because at the time Antigua was run by the Byrd family. It was probably one of the crookedest places in the Caribbean. It's a little more clean now. But I said, I don't want to do it. He kept on bothering me, and I said, look, I will not take you as a client. That has to be clearly understood. I owe no duty to you. I will make a couple of phone calls about this. That's all I'll do. Well, I had my attorney call the FBI. And with my permission, they tapped my phones. And it turned out that the guy with the suitcase full of money was from the United States Customs Service trying to sting me. So for a while, we had the FBI and the Customs Service tapping each other and both listening in on the phone calls. And, you know, they were trying to get the little guy, trying to get me. And I, of course, if I had said yes to a penny, would have been put under the jail. But these big banks do it all the time, and they get away with it, which proves that there is no equal protection under law in the United States. In fact, when big American banks send criminal money to little offshore banks or other institutions, financial institutions like mine outside the United States doesn't criminally prosecute the big bank in the U.S. under their jurisdiction. They try to prosecute the little guy who's in the other country. It's typical of the United States, and one of the reasons I left, it's always somebody else's fault. And that's the way the United States goes, and that's why these big banks will keep on laundering money. The big corporations will keep on defrauding the public and destroying lives because they're in bed with the government. They get slapped on the wrist, and we get slapped down hard. You know, they can keep money offshore and not pay taxes on it, but come January 1st, we're supposed to report everything we have in every account except possibly an account in a sperm bank around the world. Not because the government wants to collect taxes on it, although it does at some point, but because the government wants to prepare to confiscate it, because the government is planning on a wealth tax to come in where you, even if you do nothing and have no income, they will tax you every year on what you've got. So your money will go down and down and down and down and down, while at the same time they're inflating the currency, and so the value of your money is going down and down and down and down, which is just going to escalate the whole thing. Well, one thing makes me feel a little safer. The Congress is going on a 5-week recess. And I believe it was Mark Twain who said, no man is secure in his life, liberty, or property while Congress is in session. And House Republicans are leaving town for a 5-week recess without voting on a continuing resolution or even introducing it. So there is no catch-all spending bill to avert a government shutdown. No CR this week, said one GOP aide, adding that there's zero chance of a text appearing this week. Now, frankly, I don't care. I think it's a good thing if the government would shut down. I remember when I lived in Washington and there would be an inch or a half an inch of snow, quarter of an inch of snow. They used to say quarter of an inch of snow or half an inch of rain and Washington shut down. And they would tell all the people in the federal government, gee, only essential workers have to come in today. Now, the question I ask is, why do the rest of them have jobs if they're not essential? And no one could ever answer that. So, Congress is going home to try to shore up, try to lie to their constituents and tell them they've done things. And, the media participates in this. They want this, they talk about a do-nothing Congress, and they purposely demonize Congress because they're afraid after this election that the Republicans and possibly even conservatives might have a majority in both houses of Congress. So they demonize Congress as do-nothing. But point in fact, why do we need more laws? The good Lord only had 10. And anything that's built on other than those 10, I question the moral validity of it. But yet, the press constantly pushes, the mainstream press talks about a do-nothing Congress. What Congress ought to be doing is going in and going through the code of the USC, United States Code, and ripping out things, ripping out whole pages, throwing out whole books. It's like 57 books long, when you put it all together. And they ought to be throwing it out and cleaning it up and making it easy and lowering the size of government, decreasing the size of government. Then they'd be doing something worthwhile. But this idea that they don't react to every single situation and pass a new bill is just BS. It does not work. It is akin to curing a common cold by inducing double pneumonia. The problems that America and the world are suffering is from too much government. It is from the politicization of virtually everything. There is no conspiracy here. It's very simple. These people think that they are better than we are, that they know more than we are. They're part of the establishment. It used to be called when I was young. There's all kinds of names. You hear Bilderbergers, Council on Foreign Relations, conspiracy, all this, that. I don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is they think they're better than us and want to create a world that they run, and we are only here to serve them. That's what they mean by a sustainable environment. Just enough of us to serve them. Well, now we're at the top of the first hour, but we'll be right back after about 6 minutes because we have news and a commercial, so don't go away. When we come back, it will be Technology Tuesday, and we'll be talking about all the ways that the government's doing nasty things to us technologically and snooping on us. Talk about the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,121st day of voluntary exile and protest from the United States of America. You can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, you'll be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada or by Skype from around the world and join the conversation. Also, remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. Today, according to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is $15,928,934,000,000 and counting at a speed so fast I keep track. It just went up $1 million. The debt per citizen is $50,719, but the debt per taxpayer, and I assume most of my listeners are taxpayers, is $139,651. The GDP, or gross domestic product, is of course lagging behind the national debt, which means the debt is bigger than the entire United States earns in a whole year. The debt's bigger than that. But the total U.S. debt, when you add up everything, not just federal government debt, but all debt, is a staggering $56,953,212,000,000, or $181,344 per citizen. That is a lot of money by anyone's counting. Well, today is Technology Tuesday, which means my guest is my nephew, Nicholas Finzer, the CEO of Internet Totality LLC in St. Petersburg, Florida. He's my co-host, and he is our resident techie. Hello, Nick. How are you today?
Hey, David. Just another beautiful day in the home of the free and land of the brave.
Really? Okay. You still free and brave? Some people, I hope, are.
Well, we can.
I call it the home of the mortgage and the land of the depraved. Anyway, I know you want to talk about the Cybersecurity Act 2012, which is basically CISPA 2 under a new name, in which Representative Ron Paul calls Big Brother writ large. Do you want to explain about Big Brother writ large?
Well, no, not really. What I wanted to talk about, you actually already covered last hour. But
okay.
I wanted to rescind any endorsement I gave for it last week at least until the spineless Senate Democrats stop trying to attach anti-gun or gun control amendments to a cybersecurity bill.
Yeah, well, that's one of the problems that the Founding Fathers didn't fix, which the Florida Constitution, at least the old one, I don't know if it's still in the new Constitution, but the old one did fix. You weren't allowed to have these riders that weren't germane to the main issue of the bill put on. They've been doing this with the federal government forever, and it's one of those things, frankly, the Founding Fathers overlooked, and were I to rewrite the Constitution, I would certainly put that in.
Yeah, well, there's actually a bill in the House right now that's sponsored by 8 representatives, including Ron Paul, that's called the One Subject at a Time Act, and you should definitely call your senators and ask them to introduce such a bill too, and your reps to support it in the House, because it's a good idea.
Okay, which would do the same thing then?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
It's
not a constitutional level, unfortunately, but better than the current system.
Yeah, that would be great, because this is how they sneak these things through. So they take something that's otherwise, I mean, they love a good disaster, like hurricane relief. They could stick more riders on a hurricane relief bill. I mean, if you go back and look at the after Hurricane Andrew, they stuck a dozen riders onto that bill from everything from, farm supports to whatever. It's a great way to do it, because most of these senators don't read the legislation.
Right. The One Subject at a Time Act is actually very short. It's less than a whole page, and would eliminate all of that. So hopefully that can get passed one of these days. Yeah,
the two things that should happen is one subject at a time, and that members of Congress should actually have to read the legislation before they vote on it.
Well, it's funny, because the organization that wrote the One Subject at a Time Act also has one they're trying to get introduced into the legislature called the Read the Bills Act, which does what you're talking about right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing that we are required, under the law, ignorance of the law is no excuse, and yet the people probably most ignorant of the law are the very people who work inside that domed building at the center of South and East Capitol Streets.
Yeah, well, and they vote on bills that are thousands of pages long 2 days after they're introduced. That's going to happen.
Yeah, well, of course, and of course that's when these bad things get passed. They get done with a wink and a nod, and by unanimous consent. And nobody objects, and I think if I were there, every time they ask unanimous consent, I would say no, and I'd really gear up the works. When we come back, now we have to break for a 5-minute commercial. When we come back, we'll talk about the NSA head wanting more control of the Internet. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Stay tuned. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and I'm joined today with my technology co-host, Nicholas Finzer, who's CEO of Internet Totality LLC. We're talking about all things technical. And our second topic is the NSA head wants more control of the Internet. General Keith Alexander, head of the NSA, says that the U.S. Internet's infrastructure needs to be redesigned to allow the NSA to know instantly when overseas hackers might be attacking public or private infrastructure and computer networks. Alexander spoke at the annual DEF CON computer hacking conference in Las Vegas. It was a symbolic appearance that he said was motivated by a need to interest in the hacker community in helping to make the Internet more secure. Alexander, who's also commander of the U.S. Cyber Command, described the Internet as, quote, at great risk from exploitation, disruption, and destruction. And I guess he wasn't talking about Internet porn. So, Nick, what about that?
Well, because the Internet is a decentralized global network of interconnected private and public networks, it's really hard for the NSA to track Internet activity, at least to the degree that they'd like. So, but this decentralized nature of the Internet is really what gives it its strength as far as privacy and openness. So, I definitely don't want to see that go away. Well, basically what the NSA is proposing is some sort of series of checkpoints across the Internet where they can inspect traffic. But my question is, what can they really do if they detect an attack? They could cut the connection or block the source of the attack. But if that's the case, then what we've done is created a national firewall similar to the one that Red China uses. It'd have the same capabilities, even if the NSA's intentions were pure. But how long before that system would be used for evil, assuming it wasn't used for evil right away? For such a system to be effective, they would need access to all the internet communications in this country and have the ability to block them. So once you have, basically then right away you have warrantless wiretappings and eavesdropping, which is clearly an NSA favorite. They've been doing that for a long time. And you'd also have the ability to block anything deemed undesirable, all in the hands of the federal government, and not just the federal government, but the federal agency with the least respect for the Constitution.
Well, the federal agency that is basically a military agency that takes its orders directly from the National Command Authority, the guy with imperial ambitions.
Yeah, well, exactly. And last week we talked about a NSA whistleblower who was describing what he says is a network of interception stations across the country that lets the NSA siphon all of pretty much all the traffic that goes across the internet in this country into a searchable database. And according to him, the reason that he quit the NSA was due to a cited disregard of constitutional protections after 9/11 within that organization.
So, for example, if they wanted to stop people from using PGP or other encryption, they could just deem anything that's encrypted dangerous and stop it.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility.
Okay. And so this would have a chilling effect, to use constitutional terms, a chilling effect on free speech on the internet.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they'd have to make this system work, they'd have to be able to see everything and block things. So once you give them that authority or that ability, they can use it however they like. I'm not saying. Go ahead.
It sort of reminds me of something that Hitler said. He said he didn't have to socialize German industry. He simply socialized the German people. I mean, they don't have to take over the companies. They simply have to control them.
Right. Well, I'm not saying that the federal government shouldn't have some role in our cybersecurity strategy, but I don't think this is it. The potential for abuse here far outweighs any gain.
Well, I would disagree with you. I don't think they should have any damn involvement in my cybersecurity strategy. That should be up to me and my company and you and your company and everybody else. And that's why you buy antivirus and other things, and you encrypt things, and you do backups and everything else. The only thing the federal government should be concerned about is its own security and not everybody else's cybersecurity, because I don't want a cop living in my house, and that's what will happen. I mean, finally we may get to the point. Remember when I did my Finzer's primer on the Bill of Rights? I said the only thing they hadn't violated was the Third Amendment, the quartering of troops. Mm-hmm. Well, this just about amounts to quartering of troops in everyone's home.
Well, I mean, it depends on how this the system works. I think obviously freedom and privacy need to be placed above security, but I disagree that they have no role in that. The attacks are coming largely, the vast majority of them are coming from a foreign sovereign nation. And I'm glad that they're reaching out to the hacker community, because I think what they need to do is increase the offensive strategy.
What's that foreign sovereign nation?
That would be the Red Chinese.
And this is the same country that the United States trades with and cooperates with and sold out our allies, Free China, on behalf of.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
So the United States made an enemy, built up the enemy, and now has to defend itself from that enemy that it created. I just wanted to get the history right, just so I understood.
Oh, they definitely created it, and that's something actually I'm going to talk about
in a little bit. Okay.
In a rant I have. But I think that they should be monitoring the Chinese and other threats specifically. I mean, the Chinese security can't be any better than ours, right? So, and actually we'll see in the next story that they are doing some of that, which I think is good. You may disagree, but... Well,
no, if they're watching attacks from sovereign nations, sure. I'm just very scared because I've never seen yet... Well, Ronald Reagan said the nearest thing you'll see on this earth to eternal life is a government agency.
That's right. And, you know, what I'm going to propose is more of a system where they're monitoring and looking for these attacks, you know, on their side, and then notifying the victims of the attack as it happens as quickly as they can.
Okay, well, let's go into this next one. Researchers recently watched as Chinese Red Army hackers attacked targets in both the United States and Europe. The hackers clocked in at precisely 9:23 a.m. Brussels time on July 18 last year and set to their task. In just 14 minutes of quick keyboard work, they scooped up the emails of the President of the European Council, Herman Van Rompuy. Of course, he's so unimportant, who cares? Europe's point man for shepherding the delicate politics of bailout for Greece, according to a computer record of the hackers' activity. Over 10 days last July, the hackers returned to the Council's computer 4 times, accessing the internal communications of 11 of the EU's economic, security, and foreign affairs officials. The breach, unreported until now, potentially gave the intruders an unvarnished view of the financial crisis gripping Europe, which I'm sure the Red Chinese took advantage of. And the spies were themselves being watched. Working together in secret, some 30 North American private security researchers were tracking one of the biggest and busiest hacking groups in China. U.S. intelligence has been observing this group for years and dubbed them Byzantine candor. As an Orthodox Christian, I would prefer another word than Byzantine. But that's okay. During the almost 2 months of monitoring last year, the researchers say they were struck by the sheer scale of the hackers' work as data bled from one victim after the next, from oil field services leader Halliburton Company to Washington law firm Wiley Ryan LLP, from a Canadian magistrate involved in the sensitive China extradition case to Kolkata-based tobacco and technology conglomerate ITC Limited. The researchers identified 20 victims in all. Thank God none of them were capital conservator. Many of them organizations with secrets that could give China an edge as it strives to become the world's largest economy. The targets included lawyers pursuing trade claims against the company's exporters and an energy company preparing to drill in waters China claims as its own. Shoot.
Well, you know, there are 2 interesting insights, I think, from this news. The first is a more detailed look at what the Chi-Com hackers are doing. And even more interesting, I think, is a look at some of the counter-espionage operations that, you know, the government and independent researchers are doing. And on that front, I think this story goes a long way to refute the alleged need that the NSA is claiming that we just talked about. You know, we have eyes on the Western world's biggest cybersecurity threat, the Red Army hackers. You know, a rapid response communication network to notify the targets of these attacks as quickly as possible, I think, would make a lot more sense than the national firewall where they can block communications.
Okay, now, again, the story says that it was 30 North American private security researchers that caught this, right? Not the government.
Right, they're private security companies, and that's great.
Okay, and so it seems like there is a private security way to handle this problem.
Well, the article also says that there's a full-time Air Force IT unit that monitors everything they're doing.
Okay, but of course they don't help anybody because the federal government wouldn't stoop to helping anybody but the big businesses.
Well, my point is that if they did, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, when we come back, we'll talk about this some more because you know how I like to bash Red China. But don't go away. We have to break for 5 minutes, but we will be back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'm here with Nick Finzer, the CEO of Internet Totality, LLC. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. You can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is operational, you will also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada or Skype from around the world and join the conversation or even start an argument. Today is Technology Tuesday, so we have our techie co-host, my nephew, Nicholas Finzer, the CEO of Internet Totality, LLC in St. Petersburg, Florida, who's connected to us electronically, and we're going to talk more about Red China and hacking, etc. Nicholas, are you there?
I'm here.
Very good. You know, it's interesting. If the private security researchers were able to track this, then it seems to me that diminishes the need for government tracking.
Well, I think that the government might have a role in sort of a coordination role, coordinating these sort of events. Is it absolutely necessary? I don't know, but we seem to have some sort of disagreement here about whether or not the federal government should have any role in this whatsoever. My point is that there's a reason that we hire police to patrol the public streets, and there's a reason that we hire detectives to infiltrate crime syndicates. That's because it works, and it's a pretty good system as long as they can do so without violating our civil rights, which is why I can't support any system that amounts to mass surveillance and a national firewall, because in our current government there's no way that'll be used exclusively for good. But I think having a more investigative and even an offensive role against, like the Red Chinese, for example, makes a lot of sense.
Okay. I have to come back. I guess I'm being more libertarian than you on this issue. I can see it for protecting government secure institutions, but it seems to me that this perfect opportunity, just like spam and viruses have created all kinds of companies to fight them, that this is a great opportunity for a private enterprise solution to stop hacking or to get hackers, and then perhaps is the time to bring in the government to punish them.
And that very may well be the case. I'm thinking that would work pretty well. What I'm thinking more with the government, though, is that, for example, who else is going to have the authority to make an offensive attack against the Red Chinese? I think part of what we should be doing is getting experts from the hacker community to do a counter-infiltration. That way, when these sort of things are detected, be it either by a government organization or by a private organization that can then contact the government, we should have little time bombs set up that we can disconnect their stuff once they start making an attack on us.
Well, the problem I have with that is I don't trust the government much farther than I trust the Red Chinese. And I'm not sure that the government wouldn't just pass on to the Red Chinese. So, I mean, they hold more U.S. debt than any other government country in the world. So they've got the United States literally by the short and curlies. And it seems to me that if anything, I would rather see something we did in Washington years ago when you were very, very young, is we called it a private initiative war against Moscow, actually, at the time. I would far prefer to see the private hackers launch a private initiative attack against bad countries, against people that are hacking into the United States and into Europe. I'm concerned about the Soviets and their, under Putin, their increase in power, and I'm sure they're not neglecting the internet. And I just don't trust the government to protect us. It has proved in my lifetime, I've seen it go from, when you're in trouble, go to the nearest policeman because he's your friend, to when you see a cop, don't talk to him.
Right. Well, that's the problem too, though. If we have these private attacks against them, which I think sounds great too. It's one of the reasons I, on the whole, tend to support Anonymous, because I think more often than not they're right. Is that by doing so, though, they're going to open themselves up to legal action from the federal government, and that needs to change.
True. I mean, I would agree with that. The whole federal government needs to change. But I certainly think that if anything that the federal government is going to come up with is going to be bad. I mean, look at how the United States has taken control of all the internet domains. I mean, all the top-level domains the United States now claims, as you know, as U.S. property. And
well, that's not new, though, David. They've always done that from the beginning.
Okay.
Because they invented it.
Okay. Well, the government didn't invent the internet. The internet was a
no, but the government paid for it to be invented, and that's true, unfortunately, whether you like it or not.
Okay. Well, but they have it. they are also now apparently claiming to have control over other domain names beyond their own. They're claiming TV, which is owned by Tuvalu. They're claiming, I found out, CC, which is owned by the Cocos and Keeling Islands. I mean, the United States government claims authority any place U.S. dollars are spent.
Well, yeah, that's true. And with the Internet in particular, it's because the Department of Commerce still controls the organization that controls all the other organizations in the Internet. And that's, just been that way from the beginning, and it should probably change, but that's just how it is.
Okay, but it's not good. And it's
probably not good. And I don't like it.
It's clearly, I think, unconstitutional. I don't think there's a constitutional warrant because talking over the internet or sending emails or whatever or posting things is freedom of expression, freedom of press, privacy's involved, everything else, and nowhere is there a government warrant under the Constitution to control the internet.
Well, I don't think there's an exception under the Constitution to allow them to fund the creation of it either.
I agree.
So,
I mean, go ahead.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about the other aspect, how these Chinese hackers are operating. And well, it looks like we're going to a break, but maybe afterwards we can do that.
Okay. Well, go on. You've got about 15 seconds.
Well, hopefully we can post a link to the article on the website because it's long but worth reading.
Okay, good. Well, we'll come back and we'll talk about how the Chinese hackers are operating. This is David Finzer and Nick Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Don't go away. We're going to keep on talking about Chinese hackers when we come back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio, and it's Technology Tuesday. I'm here with my technology expert co-host, my nephew Nicholas Finzer, the CEO of Internet Totality LLC in St. Petersburg, Florida, and we've been talking about hacking and the Red Chinese, etc. Nick, you had a point you wanted to make before we had to cut for commercial.
Right. Well, I was saying that this is a long article, but it's worth reading, and that hopefully we can put a link to it on the website. But what's interesting is it goes through a lot of the stuff that they're doing and how they're doing it and what they're getting from it. So what they're doing is actually pretty interesting. First, they tend to hack some mom-and-pop innocuous website, and then they use that as the staging ground for their real attacks. That's actually kind of a good thing for us because what that does is it makes it really easy for us to monitor them as long as we know what website they've hacked that they're using. We can watch everything from there. So some of the things they've been caught stealing include seismic maps of oil reserves from oil companies, trade secrets from patent law firms, and market analyses that might affect their global ventures of their state-owned companies from investment banks.
Okay.
This is all for economic gain. This is what's really irritating about this. Is all of this is to make Red China an economic power that they can't be legitimately. If we really want to stop this, I think that the U.S. and other civilized Western nations need to make a more intelligent trade policy with these barbarians.
Well, go ahead.
Well, if they want to be a part of the global community, they should have to play by the same rules as everyone else, and they don't. They have some of the most egregious human rights violations. They manipulate their currency, and they steal intellectual property and everything else from our countries. They don't have any research and development going on in their country. They just steal it from us and make knockoffs with slave labor. It's cyber guerrilla warfare.
Well, see, this is where I guess you and I would both differ from Dr. Paul, for whom I have great respect, but I believe in the principle of free trade with free nations, and that you have to distinguish between the good guys and the bad guys, and one only has to look at what they did to Tibet, one of the most harmless nations in the history of the world, to see just how horrible they are.
Well, I agree, and we give them the power by trading with them. Without that, they could steal all the trade secrets they want. Who's going to buy it from them? What products are they going to sell? Who are they going to sell these products they make with our secrets to? I'd rather pay $200 more for an iPod made in free China or Malaysia than put up with this nonsense. Like you said, I'm for free trade, but with free nations. If we take away their seat at the table until they're willing to play by the rules, I think we'd see how much of an economic powerhouse they really are. without selling us their ill-gotten goods.
Yeah, of course, the problem is, for me, it's not clearly the Red Chinese are bad guys. They're among the worst. They also prop up probably the worst regime in the world, North Korea. But there are the dividing line between good and bad guys isn't nearly as clear as it was when I was in Washington. I mean, before the fall of the Soviet Empire, it was pretty clear there was good guys and bad guys. And now you have the United States government that does terrible things. You have Russia's KGB is involved in hacking. I mean, they switched from military intelligence to commercial spying early on after the fall of the Soviet Union. And I think it's going on a much wider scale. The Red Chinese perhaps might be the best at it simply because they have more people doing it and they only pay them $1 a day or whatever to do it.
Well, I still think that they're by far the worst, committing the worst crimes. I mean, they'll plow down farmers' fields to make them work at Foxconn.
Right. Well,
I don't see that happening in Russia.
No, and of course, when you look at what they're doing economically, I know this is off subject a little bit, but they're trying to create the world reserve currency. And they're trying to create a metals exchange that they will control, which they will certainly manipulate. And so it looks like they are really going on an offensive in a lot of ways. The only thing that they are not really strong at yet is military, because they really only have the People's Liberation Army. Everything else isn't very good. But if they steal enough secrets, I mean, the Soviets got the atom bomb because of spies. Mm-hmm. They got the hydrogen bomb because of spies. Red China got admitted to the United Nations because of spies infiltrating and giving bad advice in the West in centers of power. And so, they really do have a long-term strategy to dominate the world, and they haven't changed one bit from their Middle Kingdom philosophy, where they are the Middle Kingdom and the only thing above them is heaven and the whole earth is beneath them. They are among the most racist people in the world.
That's right. Well, I'm pretty sure, and you may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Red China is a net importer of oil, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if we cut off their supply of dollars, it'd be a lot harder for them to buy all that oil since it's all priced in dollars.
Well, except they would get it from Iran and places. They would get it from the bad guys. There's too many bad guys on their side, and it seems since they've cozied up to Russia under Putin, that they could still get a lot of those things. I don't know. But
they'd have to trade something to get a currency that they could pay.
Sure, but Iran
is going to be worth nothing.
Iran doesn't use, for example, dollars anymore since the United States blocked them. Iran uses euros or other things. Right. So I'm not sure that would block them. But the problem is, even if the United States wanted to do it in today's world, I'm afraid it would go it on its own, because I think Western Europe will suck up to the Red Chinese like they have for 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the problem. To be most effective, the rest of the Western world would have to, most of it at least, would have to be, on the same page, and I don't know if they would be, but...
Well, I don't know where the free world is anymore.
Well, I didn't say the free world, I said the Western world.
I know, but I mean, I don't know where the free world is anymore. I think it's in some scattered islands in the Pacific and a few other places where you're far enough away where government isn't very effective. I mean, in many ways, despite the reputation that Serbia has, I'm much more free on a daily basis here than I would be in the United States. So it's really hard, because it seems like all the governments in the world really are working together, and they don't care what each other does. They just all want to work together to control all of us. And maybe the people running Washington really admire what the Red Chinese are doing, because they've got their people under control. That's for damn sure, and I think Washington would like to have us all under similar control.
Yeah, that's probably true, but I certainly take life in these United States over life in Peking any day.
Oh yeah, well that's true. For sure. I'm not sure about Taipei. I certainly like that. But we ought to remember that, just as an example, There is no nice word for non-Chinese people in the Chinese language. I once asked that in Taipei. I said, is it true that there's no nice word in the Chinese language for non-Chinese? And they said, well, it doesn't really mean that, but yes, in fact, it's true. We're generally called barbarians or guaylo, which means ghost people, which is a negative reference to white, to our whiteness, like the N-word is to African Americans' blackness. And they are racists who think they're above us. And this is very much a part of Asia. And I think it's a big problem that we're going to have to live with, unfortunately, because our own government is not in a position to fight back. Now, we've only got a little over a minute left. I wanted to get into, I'm going to skip this story and go down to this Pony Express story, and it's spelled P-W-N-I-E. You'll see it on the screen, those of you who are video watching. It has an upcoming product called the Power Pone that could sit unnoticed in home or work environment and yet be spying on an entire network. The Power Pone is described as a fully integrated enterprise-class penetration testing platform that has an ingenious form factor which I think is a euphemism for easily hidden, and as a highly integrated modular hardware design. Okay, tell me what you can in 30 seconds or so.
Okay. Well, I can tell you it's a really cool device. It has all sorts of features packed into it that, from controlling it via text messages to all sorts of cool stuff, sniffing on wireless networks and Bluetooth. Is it a threat to your security on your network? Well, yes, in the same sense that a machine gun's a threat to your health if someone uses it against you in your home, sure. But it also potentially has some cool uses, especially in the security penetration testing industry. It's going to be hard to get one of these things in, though, I would think. So. Okay, well, that's all the time we have for today, Nick. Thank you. And everybody, I remind you, expatriate your assets, then expatriate yourself. Because remember, you only have 3 choices left. Give in and live like a serf, fight back until you can't stand it anymore, or get out and take your freedom with you. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies.